بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. وعنعنة المعاصر محمولة على السماع بخلاف غير المعاصر، فإنها تكون مرسلة أو منقطعة، فشرط حملها على السماع ثبوت المعاصرة إلا من المدلس، فإنها ليست محمولة على السماع. وقيل يشترط في حمل عنعنة المعاصر على السماع ثبوت لقائهما، أي الشيخ والراوي عنه ولو مرة واحدة، ليحصل الأمن من باقي معنعنه عن كونه من المرسل الخفي، وهو المختار تبعا لعلي بن المديني والبخاري وغيرهما من النقاد. فأطلقوا المشافهة في الإجازة المتلفظ بها تجوزا، وكذا المكاتبة في الإجازة المكتوب بها، وهو موجود في عبارة كثير من المتأخرين بخلاف المتقدمين، فإنهم إنما يطلقونها فيما كتب به الشيخ من الحديث إلى الطالب سواء أذن له في روايته أم لا فيما إذا كتب إليه بالإجازة فقط. واشترطوا في صحة الرواية بالمناولة اقترانها بالإذن بالرواية، وهي إذا حصل هذا الشرط أرفع أنواع الإجازة لما فيها من التعيين والتشخيص. وصورتها أن يدفع الشيخ أصله أو ما قام مقامه للطالب، أو يحضر الطالب الأصل للشيخ ويقول له في الصورتين: هذا روايتي عن فلان فروه عني. وشرطه أيضا أن يمكنه منه إما بالتمليك وإما بالعارية لينقل منه ويقابل عليه، وإلا إن وله واسترد في الحال فلا يتبين لها زيادة مزية على الإجازة المعينة، وهي أن يجيزه الشيخ برواية كتاب معين ويعين له كيفية روايته له. وإذا خلت المناولة عن الإذن لم يعتبر بها عند الجمهور، وجنح من اعتبرها إلى أن مناولته إياه تقوم مقام إرساله إليه بالكتاب من بلد إلى بلد. وقد ذهب إلى صحة الرواية بالكتابة المجردة جماعة من الأئمة، ولو لم يقرن ذلك بالإذن بالرواية، كأنهم اكتفوا في ذلك بالقرينة. ولم يظهر لي فرق قوي بين مناولة الشيخ من يده للطالب وبين إرساله إليه بالكتاب من موضع إلى آخر إذا خلا كل منهما عن الإذن. وكذا اشترط الإذن في الوجادة، وهي أن يجد بخط يعرف كاتبه فيقول: وجدت بخط فلان، ولا يسوغ فيه إطلاق أخبرني بمجرد ذلك، إلا إن كان له منه إذن بالرواية عنه، وأطلق قوم ذلك فغلطوا. وكذا الوصية بالكتاب، وهو أن يوصي عند موته أو سفره لشخص معين بأصله أو بأصوله. فقد قال قوم من الأئمة المتقدمين يجوز له أن يروي تلك الأصول عنه بمجرد هذه الوصية، وأبى ذلك الجمهور إلا إن كان له منه إجازة. وكذا اشترط الإذن بالرواية في الإعلام، وهو أن يعلم الشيخ أحد الطلبة بأنني أروي الكتاب الفلاني عن فلان، فإن كان له منه إجازة اعتبر، وإلا فلا عبرة بذلك، كالإجازة العامة في المجاز له لا في المجاز به، كأن يقول: أجزت لجميع المسلمين، أو لمن أدرك حياتي، أو لأهل الإقليم الفلاني، أو لأهل البلد الفلانية، وهو أقرب إلى الصحة لقرب الانحصار. Inshallah, we'll try to reach until there. So we are discussing mu'an'an chains in which the narrator uses the word an when transmitting from his teacher. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah now mentions the ruling of such narrations, and he says that if a person uses the word an and he narrates from a mu'asir, from a contemporary, then we will assume that he heard from that person. Mullah al-Qari rahmallah commented that sawa'un thabat al-luqi baynahuma am la. That here, the way Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentioned in the sentence, it doesn't make a difference whether the person met the sheikh or he did not meet the sheikh, whether it's proven that he met the sheikh or whether it's not proven that he met the sheikh. And we explained all of this in detail. If you remember, Ibn Hajar rahmallah discussed this on which page was it? On page 63. And we explained the rulings in detail in lesson 40 and lesson 41. Ibn Hajar rahmallah now says that in contrast, to this is where a person uses the word an and is narrating from someone who passed away before he was even born. بخلاف غير المعاصر. So if it is from someone who you know he was from a different era, then it's obvious that this person here he did not get that narration directly from that person because he was not born when that person passed away. So how did he hear the narration? So in this case, either it will be mursal if it is a tabi'i using the word an and quoting from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then it will be mursal, or it will be munqati'. If it is anyone else using the word an and quoting from someone who passed away long before, then it will be munqati'. So from these two lines, we understand that the method of determining whether the person actually heard from the person that he is quoting from or whether he did not hear is to look at the dates of birth and at the dates of their demise. Ibn Hajar rahmallah only stipulates in this statement that they must be from the same era. So in the footnotes, Sheikh Nuruddin Itra qualifies it and says something that Ibn Hajar is only going to mention as the next view and is going to mention later. So he says that مع إمكان لقاء الراوي لمن روى عنه بصيغة عن, that one is that they were in the same era, but it must also be that there was possibility of them meeting. مثل أن نعلم من تاريخهما أن كل منهما أقام في بلدة كذا. Maybe we know that they both visited a particular place or were in a certain place. So he clarifies وإلا فلا تكفي المعاصرة أي مجرد وجودهما في عصر واحد كيفما كان. You cannot say because they just lived in the same era that it's greatly possible that this person got the narration directly from him. والحاصل في تحقيق المسألة أن قول الراوي عن فلان يحمل على السماع يعتبر سماعه بشيخين بشرطين. So he mentioned that. So nevertheless, Ibn Hajar rahmallah, the way he mentioned it here, it's incomplete. And then he again says, فَشَرْطُ حَمْلِ عَلَى السَّمَاعِ ثُبُوتُ الْمُعَاصَرَةِ, that you just have to take into consideration whether they were in the same time or not. And from that, you can base the ruling on whether the student heard from the sheikh directly or whether he did not hear. Commenting on this, Al-Maqasim rahmallah said, زِيَادَةٌ مُسْتَغْنًا عَنْهَا. It wasn't necessary for Ibn Hajar rahmallah to even give this here. He says, وَإِنَّمَا ذُكِرَتْ لِأَجَلِ الْإِسْتِثْنَاءِ الَّذِي فِي الْمَتْنِ مَعَ تَقَدُّمِ. But basically, he's just criticizing the way Ibn Hajar rahmallah chose his wording here. Now Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentions one exception, and he said, إِلَّا مِنَ الْمُدَلِّسِ. The only contradiction is from a mudallis. أي العنا منه ولو كان معاصرا, that if a person is known to be a mudallis, if a person has transmitted narrations that he did not hear and it's proven that he used ambiguous words just to give the listener the impression that he heard directly, then whether he was a contemporary or not, whether they lived in the same era or not, it will not be regarded as سماع. فإنها ليست محمولة على السماع. And the reason is simple, أي الاتهام بالتدليس في روايته. Because there's now, once it's proven that he made tadlis and he tried to give the false impression that he heard, then whenever he is quoting, you will always have this doubt that did he hear directly, or is he again just trying to give the impression that he heard, meantime he did not hear. So therefore, for such a person, إِلَّا إِذَا صَرَّحَ بِالتَّحْدِيثِ وَالسَّمَاعِ, he will have to clearly mention that he heard, then only we will accept the narration. So this is the statement which Ibn Hajar rahmallah gave. If a person has to read the statement, if a student reads the statement, he will understand that this is the view of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah. Then he further presents another view, but he first mentions the words of Tamriz. So in spite of mentioning this view that we mentioned thus far, he now also brings sighatul Tamriz to mention another view. So that means that the next view that he's mentioning is a weak view. But you're going to see just now he's going to mention that this second view which he's mentioning is the وَهُوَ الْمُخْتَارِ. So nevertheless he says وَقِيلَ يُشْتَرَطُ فِي حَمْلِ عَنْعَنَةِ الْمُعَاصَرَ عَلَى السَّمَاءِ ثُبُوتُ لِقَائِهِمَا. So not even just the possibility of them meeting, he's now putting a very stringent condition that it must be, that the other scholars, they say that it must be proven that they met. And we have explained all of this here, that maybe in other asanid from other narrations he used the word haddathana or akhbarana, and that proves that they met. So it must be proven الشيخ هو الراوي ولو مرة واحدة, even if it is just once, it must be proven that they met. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah first made the claim that it's fine to consider that there is sama' in a mu'an'an if the person is a contemporary of the one who is transmitting from. And he mentioned that that's the only thing. He now quotes an additional clause, and that is that there must be evidence that the narrator also met the one that he is quoting from. And he explains why it is important to see if they met لِيَحْصُلَ الْأَمْنِ, so that you can get this peace of mind. And you know that for sure بسبب اللقي مرة المحمول على السماء بحسب حسن الظن بالمسلم. So he's saying that once they met at least once, it's established that they met even once, you can get this a kind of surety من باقي معنعنته عن كونه من المرسل الخفي. So we explain what مرسل الخفي and تدليس مرسل الخفي is when it is a person in the same who lived in the same time and you don't know whether he met the other person, then this is considered as مرسل الخفي. So Ibn Hajar now mentions that وهو المختار. So this now contradicts what he just mentioned in the beginning. So he mentions that this is the preferred view. And then he brought this also with the sigha to tamriz. So when noticing how Ibn Hajar rahmallah phrased this whole paragraph, it becomes difficult to determine exactly what was the view of Ibn Hajar rahimahullah. Mullah al-Qari rahmallah explains how it could be understood that Ibn Hajar rahmallah probably held the first view, and it also could be understood that he preferred the second view. So he says وَاخْتَارَ الْمُصَنِّفُ مَا قَالَهُ Muslim. That is mentioning the first view. وَلِذَا عَبَّرَ عَنِ اشْتِرَاطِ ثُبُوتِ اللِّقَاءِ بِقِيلَ. And therefore he brought the word قِيلَ. So that's the one possibility. And وَيُمْكِنُ أَنَّ اخْتَارَ قَوْلَ الْبُخَارِيِّ وَلِذَا أَطْلَقَ قَوْلَهُ وَهُوَ الْمُخْتَارِ. So you can see just from the text, without going out to Fathul Bari and without looking at the other books of Ibn Hajar rahmallah, just from the text here, what is brought in Nuzha, it becomes difficult to determine what his view was. But obviously his view was the same like Imam Bukhari rahmallah. So he says طبعا لعلي ibn al-Madini wal-Bukhari. We mentioned that the view of Ali ibn al-Madini and Imam Bukhari rahmallah is not the same. And therefore it also that whole discussion on who Imam Muslim rahmallah, when he used all those strong words in the muqaddamah of his Sahih, who he was referring to. And therefore in the footnote Shaykh Nuruddin Itr says في نسبة هذا الرأي للبخاري نظر شديد وذلك لأن مسلما معروف بغاية الإعظام والاحترام لشيخ البخاري. That it's so known that Imam Muslim rahmallah held Imam Bukhari in such high esteem بما لا يتناسب مع شدة اللهجة والإنكار في رد مسلم على هذا الرأي. Nevertheless, Ibn Hajar rahmallah is mentioning that it is the view of Ali ibn al-Madini and Imam Bukhari and others. But regarding the ruling of these narrations, we have discussed this in some detail in lessons 40 and 41. In the lessons of Muqaddimah ibn Salah, we discussed it in even more detail. Hence here we just go through what Mullah al-Qari rahmallah says. He mentions واختلفوا في حكم الإسناد المعنعن فالصحيح الذي عليه العمل وذهب إليه الجماهير من أئمة الحديث أنه من قبيل الإسناد المتصل ومحمول على السماع بشرط سلامة الراوي الذي رواه بالعنعنة من التدليس ويشترط ثبوت الملاقاة لما رواه عنه بالعنعنة. So this is what he's mentioning. He's putting this additional clause ويشترط, that it's necessary that they must have met, and he's saying that this is the view of Jamahir min أئمة الحديث. And he also made tasheeh. He said فالصحيح الذي عليه العمل. But after attributing this to such a huge group of scholars and making tasheeh of it, etc., he then says, وَأَنْكَرَ مُسْلِمٌ فِي خُطْبَةِ صَحِيحِهِ اشْتِرَاطَ ذَلِكَ. That Imam Muslim rahmallah, he denied this view, he rejected this view, and he said that وَأَنَّ الْقَوْلَ سَائِغَ مُتَّفَقَ عَلَيْهِ بَيْنَ أَهْلِ الْعِلْمِ بِالْأَخْبَارِ قَدِيمًا وَحَدِيثًا. He mentions that Imam Muslim rahmallah mentioned in his muqaddamah that the view which everyone accepts from the recent scholars and earlier scholars is that it's fine if they are just from the same era. and he's saying that it's even fine that ولم يأتي في خبر واحد أنهما اجتمعا أو تشافها. even if it's not established that they met. So this is how Mullah al-Qari rahmallah presented the two views. In the footnote, Sheikh Rahili rahmallah gives the summary of this here, and he says, وَحُكْمُهَا إذا كانت عنعنة معاصر فحكمها الاتصال ما لم يكن مدلسا فشرط حمل الأنعنة على الاتصال إذن شرطان. So he's mentioning that al-mu'asara and adam al-tadlis. So again, this is how they are mentioning the two views. And this is how lots of scholars explain the two views. But we explained in lesson 40 that if you read and you analyze and you understand what Imam Muslim rahmallah wrote in his introduction, and even if you look at his practice, you will understand that his view has been misquoted and he's being misrepresented. He was not so lenient to just accept a narration if the one narrator was merely in the same time as the one who he is narrating from. Rather, we mentioned that we established that he had additional conditions, so you can refer to lesson 40. He said that we also mentioned that it's essential to quote his view with all these additional. So the first is that the narrator must be reliable, the second, he must not be mudallis, and the third is that he must be from the same era. So until here, it's fine. But then comes the two important and crucial conditions which many forget to mention. That is that it was possible. There has to be imkanul liqa. So when you look at how Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentioned this paragraph in the beginning, he didn't even mention about imkanul liqa. So that's also, if you are taking the view of Imam Muslim, then he must quote it from Imam Muslim. And then the fifth is that there must be no proof to show that he did not meet the one who he is narrating from. So we discussed this in lesson 14, and thereafter we also established that Imam Bukhari rahmallah too, he also actually authenticated narrations even if liqa was not established. So even if it just fulfilled these 5 conditions which we're mentioning from Imam Muslim. Leave alone just authenticating such narrations, Imam Bukhari rahmallah even brought these types of narrations in his Sahih. So in his Sahih, he had the goal of bringing the most authentic of narrations. Yet Imam Bukhari rahmallah did not hesitate to mention narrations that were transmitted with the word an, even though there was no liqa, it was established. And we cited the example that the sanad where Imam Bukhari rahmallah brought from Abdullah ibn Burayda an Abil Aswad. So it's with the word an, and there is no thubutul liqa there, and we presented other examples as well. So in short, there is this long debate on whether this was the view of Imam Bukhari and whether Imam Muslim was referring to him, and all of this we discussed already. Now in this passage, Ibn Hajar rahmallah only mentioned about the word an. He's only discussing about an'anatul mu'asir. Hence Ibn al-Hanbali rahmallah in Qaful Athar he clarified, وَأَمَّا جَمِيعُ مَا كَانَ نَحْوَ عَنْ فَالظَّاهِرُ أَنَّ حُكْمَهُ حُكْمُهَا. They're saying that all those other words that you remember there on page 124, Ibn Hajar rahmallah said, ثم عن ونحوها من الصيغ المحتملة للسماع والإجازة ولعدم السماع أيضا وهذا مثل قال وذكر وروى. So those words قال ذكر and روى, they all have the same ruling according to Qadi al-Qadha, who is Ibn Hajar rahmallah. Moving on, Ibn Hajar rahmallah leaves out now the 5th category, and he discussed the 6th category. So when when discussing the words وصيغ الأداء, then he mentioned al-ula and then thumma. So he leaves out the 5th, and he goes to the next category, the 6th category. So he first discussed the next 2 words, and then he comes back to munawala. So compared to the categories that he brought earlier, now this becomes laf wa nashr ghair murattab. From Nur al-Anwar, that laf wa nashr ghair murattab is not bringing it in the same order. So he says wa atlaqu. Here when he says وَأَطْلَقُوا, this refers to earlier scholars, as you can understand from the context. And Alam al-Laqani rahmallah said, أي العلماء المحدث من المتقدمين, it refers to earlier scholars. However, Alam al-Munawi rahmallah, for some reason, he understood this to mean latter day scholars, and hence in Al-Yawaqit wa Durar he said وَأَطْلَقُوا أي أطلق المتأخرون. But this is incorrect, because remember again that this portion وَأَطْلَقُوا الْمُشَافَهَةَ, it's part of Nukhbah, In Nukhba, when you go to it, you can easily understand reading there that it's the Dhamir has to go back. The marja of the Dhamir in Atlaqu goes back to the earlier scholars. And likewise, Nuzhatun Nadar is the explanation of Nukhba. So very shortly, you will see Ibn Hajar very clearly mentioning it, that it refers to the earlier scholars. So he says, فَأَطْلَقُ الْمُشَافَهَ فِي الْإِجَازَةِ الْمُتَلَفِّظ بِهَا تَجَوُّزًا. So the word mushafaha. So now he's saying that they use the word mushafaha for ijazah. And they use this here in a majazi way, in a metaphorical way. Why? Because the word ijazah literally gives the impression that or it literally means rather, that the narration was heard directly. If you look at the meaning of mushafaha, so Mullah al-Qari rahmallah said, لأن المشافهة في اللغة المخاطبة من فيك إلى فيه لا التلفظ. Mushafaha comes from the word shafatain, which means your lips. So you're seeing the person's lips moving. That means you're in the person's presence. From his lips, it's coming to you. That's how the passing of this information is being given. Shafahani. So in Arabic, when you use the word mushafaha, according to the literal meaning, that I heard it, I got it from his own lips, so to say. I heard it from him directly. But what these scholars, they started to use it as majazan. They started to use it for ijazah. So Alama Munawi rahmallah explains that they would say akhbarana fulanun bimushafahatin or shafahani fulanun bikadha. This means that they got it through ijazah. But it is the element of deceiving, because you're using the word shafahani. So maybe a person could have got a narration through ijazah, and then he could come and say shafahani just to try and give the impression that he heard it. So Alam al-Qani says, وَفِيهِ طَرْفٌ مِنَ التَّدْلِيسِ وَالْإِيهَامِ لأنه لا يتبادر منه إلا مشافهة الشيخ له بالتحديث. It's the meaning which is mutabadir ila dhahn, which comes to your mind as soon as you hear the word mushafaha, is that you heard directly from the sheikh and that you did not get it from ijazah. Hafiz ibn Hajar rahmallah mentions that the same ruling applies to mukataba. So wakadha, now he's going to explain what's mukataba just now. So he says wakadha al-mukataba fil ijazati al-maktub biha. So here is that also when the sheikh has to write his narrations to the student, then so he says وَهُوَ مَوْجُودٌ فِي عِبَارَةِ كَثِيرٍ مِنَ الْمُتَأَخِّرِينَ. That you will find that many of the latter day scholars, they now use these words, and they will say أخبرنا فلان مكاتبة أو كتابة أو في كتابة. So just as we quoted from Alama al-Qani rahmallah regarding mushafaha, that it has the element of tadlis, the same applies to mukataba. It also has the element of tadlis. أما المشافهة فلأنها لمشافهته بالتحديث. When you're using the word mushafaha, then it makes you understand that you heard it directly from the sheikh. وأما الكتابة فلإيهامها الكتابة بنفس الحديث كما يفعله المتقدمون. So mutaqaddimun, they would it gives the impression that you are using the terminology in the same way as the mutaqaddimin. And بخلاف المتقدمين, Ibn Hajar rahmallah is saying that this here is in contrast to the متقدمين. فإنهم إنما يطلقونها فيما كتب به الشيخ من الحديث إلى الطالب. This is the meaning of mukataba. What's the meaning of mukataba? Is the earlier scholars would use it when the sheikh has to write his narrations to the student. So he took and he actually wrote the actual hadith. Now whether he wrote that he gives ijazah or not, that's immaterial. The object is that he must write the actual ahadith. سواء أذن له في روايته أم لا. So he just took a paper and wrote a hadith. إنما الأعمال بالنيات, wrote second hadith, third hadith, and he gave it. That is, he didn't mention anything about ijazah. So that is what is called mukataba. يعني سواء انضم إليه الإجازة أم لا. Whether he mentions that I give you permission to narrate these ahadith from me, or whether he does not give such permission, this is what is called a mukataba. So لا فيما إذا كتب إليه بالإجازة فقط. You cannot just write ijazah. So there's a difference between writing on a paper إنما الأعمال بالنيات or writing on a paper أجزت لفلان أن يروي عني. So it does not, the mutaqaddimun, they would not use the word mukataba for writing the words of ijazah only. Rather, they would use it for writing the actual ahadith. The sheikh has to write the actual ahadith He must not just be writing ijazah, that I give ijazah. So maybe actual ahadith could be over 10 pages. But to write that ajaztu li Quranin ayarwi anwi is half a line. So he's not only writing this half a line, rather he's writing the 10 pages, he's writing the actual ahadith. So Mullah al-Qari rahmallah, he explains how this should be done, and he says, وَصُورَةٌ ضِمَامِ الْإِجَازَةِ أَن يَكْتُبَ الشَّيْخُ شَيْئًا مِنْ حَدِيثِهِ بِخَطِّهِ. He writes a few ahadith with his own handwriting. Or بِأَمْرِ غَيْرِهِ, or maybe he asks someone else to write. فَيَكْتُبَ عَنْهُ بِإِذْنِهِ, and that person then write because he got this permission or this command from the Sheikh. سواء كتب أو كتب عنه إلى غائب أو حاضر عنده. And then he writes أجزت لك ما كتبته لك أو نحو ذلك. So this is the meaning of mukataba with ijazah. And then you can also have mukataba without ijazah. Now actually, since all of these categories involve ijazah, and also taking note that ijazah is something that is so common today, it will be apt to quote the meaning of ijazah. So Ibn Hajar rahmallah says, or rather Mullah al-Qari rahmallah, he says that know that ijazah, i'lam anna al-ijazah masdaru ajaza. So it's the masdar of the word ajaza, is basically coming from bab if'al. Now there are different meanings which could be taken. وَلَهَا مَعَانٍ يَنْطَبِقُ الْإِصْطِلَاحَ مِنْهَا عَلَى الْإِبَاحَةِ. So maybe it could be, so the one meaning of ijazah is where you allow water to flow to your neighbor. So maybe just like how you allow the water to flow, you're allowing here. One meaning of ijazah is where you permit. So just as you permit something, you are permitting here, you are giving permission to the student to narrate. So like this here, there are lots of different meanings. And all of these meanings could then apply here to the technical meaning of ijazah. So ijazah could be in a meaning of permission. It could be in a meaning of allowing, etc. So that is how when a person has to say ajaztu lahu riwayat masmu'ati, that I permit him, then he's just giving the permission, because even though there was no reading of the narrations. Now moving on, Ibn Hajar rahmallah explains the conditions of another method of attaining a narration, and that is through munawala. So in the beginning of the kitab, he spoke about order. If a person, especially if it's a first-time person reading this kitab, then he's going to get confused now, because he's saying وَاشْتَرَطُوا فِي صِحَّةِ الرِّوَايَةِ بِالْمُنَاوَلَةِ اقترانها بالإذن بالرواية. That the scholars have also stipulated that for munawala to be correct, it's necessary that there is permission of narrating. Ijazah is given, but he didn't as yet. He's still going to explain what's munawala shortly. So therefore the order is not so good. He should have first explained what's munawala and then tell you the condition of munawala. You don't even know what's munawala, but he's already telling you conditions of munawala. So for now, he said that the Sheikh must give ijazah. And he explains the status of the narration if the Sheikh has to give ijazah. So you can see he's still not even explaining to you what's munawala, but he's telling you that how great it's going to be. وَهِيَ إِذَا حَصَلَ هَذَا الشَّرْطِ أَرْفَعُ أَنْوَاعِ الْإِجَازَةِ. If the Sheikh has to give permission, and so he wrote the narrations and is giving permission also, then it's going to be the highest form of ijazah, and it will be the best way of ijazah happening. لما فيها من التعيين والتشخيص, because he's clearly specifying who these narrations are for, and is also stipulating which narrations it is. So here he's mentioning that it's the highest form of ijazah. In fact, some scholars felt that it is equal to the highest way, the highest method and the best way of narrating a narration, of attaining a narration. So we mentioned previously that the best way that a person can attain a narration is through sama'. So some have felt that munawala is equal to sama'. بل ذهب جماعة إلى أنها تعادل السماع. Allama al-Qani rahmallah said that some scholars have felt that it's equal to sama'. So that means if the best way, according to this group of scholars, is that a student go and hear the narrations directly from the sheikh. That's the one way. Or that the sheikh actually writes the narrations and write that he's giving ijazah. Then that's the best way. So whether the sheikh is giving it verbally or whether he's giving it in a written form and is giving ijazah, they are both equal. So that's how some scholars felt. Others felt that it's even better than that way. So leave alone just being on par with the best way of attaining a narration, it's actually even better. So كما ذهب جماعة إلى أنها أعلى منه. That others have felt that it's even better. So that means the best way, the absolute best way, is to attain a narration through السماع. Like Imam Munawi رحمه الله quoted ونقل ابن الأثير في مقدمة جامع الأصول إن من المحدثين من ذهب إلى أنها أرجح من السماع. That there are muhaddithin who felt that this here is actually better than سماع. Why? لأن الثقة بكتاب الشيخ مع إذنه فوق الثقة بالسماع منه. That imagine if a person is just listening to the sheikh, if he's just hearing from the sheikh, then it's possible that maybe he can lose his attention, maybe he does not hear correctly. وأثبت لما يدخل من الوهم على السماع والمسمع. Maybe the sheikh himself could be making a mistake. You know, when talking, sometimes you can have a slip of a tongue. Maybe sometimes unconsciously you can just mention something in a particular way. So, but when you are writing it, now you are concentrating, you are making sure that you are writing correctly. And then if you are giving it to the student 100%, he got exactly what you have written in the same way that you have written it. So therefore, these scholars felt that it will be better. But the truth is that it is inferior to both سماع and عرض. على ما القاني said والحق أنها دونه كما يفهم من تخصيص أرفعيتها بأنواع الإجازة. So the highest and the best way of getting a narration will be سماع. The second best way will be عرض, where the student reads in the sheikh lessons. And this year will be the third, it will be in the third place. That means munawala will be in the third category. After explaining this here, the conditions and the status of it, now only Ibn Hajar rahmallah explains what is munawala. So he says, وَصُورَتُهَا أَن يَدْفَعَ الشَّيْخُ أَصْلَهُ أو ما قام مقامه للطالب. So he gives his own personal copy, or in our ما قام مقامه, in our context you understand a photocopy of his copy. Maybe if he in those times, since they didn't have photocopies, so maybe there was another very reliable and close student to the sheikh, and he wrote down all those narrations, and the sheikh went through it, etc. So that's maqama maqamahu. So he gives it to the student. أو يحضر الطالب الأصل, or maybe the student, he managed to bring a copy and he gives it to the sheikh. And then in both ways, in both scenarios, the sheikh tells him, هذا روايتي عن فلان فروه عني. These are my ahadith which I got from a particular person. Now you may go and you may narrate from me. So you can either say هذا روايتي, or you could use basically similar words, like you can say هذا مسموعي, or هذا مقروئي, or مجازي, or munawali, or maktub bihi ilayya, etc. You can use all these kind of words. Basically, these are words which I have been authorized to transmit, and now you can go and you can narrate from me. So Allama ibn Salah rahmallah, he refers to this as ardul munawala. So you got the first was ardul qira'ah, where the student reads, and this year he refers to it as ardul munawala. So Mullah al-Qari explains, فَإِذَا عَرَضَ الطَّالِبُ الْكِتَابَ عَلَى الشيخ تأمله الشيخ وهو عارف متيقظ ليعلم صحته وعدم الزيادة فيه أو النقص منه أو يترك تحت يده فيمر عليه بالمقابلة ونحوها إن لم يكن عارفا متيقظا وكل ذلك كما صرح به الخطيب على سبيل الوجوب. So basically it's necessary that the sheikh has to go through it, etc. Then this year will be called as Ardul Munawala. So this is Ibn Hajar explained the scenario, and now he's explaining the conditions. What are the conditions of Munawala? Ibn Hajar rahmallah explains, وَشَرْطُهُ أَيْضًا أَن يُمَكِّنَهُ مِنْهُ. That he must give, the condition of Munawala is that he must give the student a chance of going through those notes. والمعنى كما يشترط اقترانها بالإذن بالرواية. So the first condition was that he must give permission to narrate, and now the second condition is يشترط أن يمكن الشيخ الطالب من أصله أو فرعه القائم مقامه فيقدر على الانتفاع به. That the student must have the chance and the opportunity of reading it and going through it and understanding which narrations it is that he is getting ijazah for. So there are different ways in which the Shaykh can give the student access. Imma bit tamlik. So the one way is through tamlik. Now tamlik, it does not matter how tamlik is transferred, how the ownership is transferred. Maybe the Shaykh is giving it over. So it could be maybe he's giving as a gift, or maybe he's even selling it. So maybe he can say, I'm giving you ijazah of this year, but you can buy this book from me. So walau bil bay'. But then Allama al-Qani says, فَالصَّدَقَةُ وَالْهِبَةُ وَالْعَطِيَّةُ أَوْلَى. It's best rather for the Shaykh to give it as a gift or to hand it over without selling it. But if the Shaykh has to sell it and say that you must pay me for this book, and then you will know, then you are getting so much, you are getting ijazah, then that too is fine. So imma bit tamlik. Or the second is wa imma bil ariyah, or he borrows it to him, but he borrows it to him in such a way لِيَنْقُلَ مِنْهُ وَيُقَابِلَ عَلَيْهِ, that the student has the chance and he has the opportunity of going through it and scrutinizing it and checking it, etc. If he does not give the student opportunity to copy the narrations or even a chance to read the narrations, then it will no more be even if you're calling it munawala, it will just be like normal ijazah. That means it will not be this highest form of ijazah, which Ibn Hajar rahmallah spoke about, where he said, وَهِيَ إِذَا حَصَلَ هَذَا الشَّرْطِ أَرْفَعُ أَنْوَاعِ الْإِجَازَةِ. It will not be أَرْفَعُ أَنْوَاعِ الْإِجَازَةِ if the student doesn't have the opportunity and the chance of going through the narrations. So it will then be like normal ijazah, and hence it will be in the fourth category. It will not be the highest form of ijazah. This is what Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentions. وَإِلَّا إِنَّا وَلَهُ. If he gives him the book, but what's the raddahu fil hal? He asked, he said, give me back the book. So the student got the book, he's got a closed book, he holds it in his hands a little bit, and then the Shaykh tells him, give it back to me. So now he didn't even read through the book, leave alone copy. Then فَلَا يَتَبَيَّنُ لَا زِيَارَةَ مَزِيَّةٍ عَلَى الْإِجَازَةِ الْمُعَيَّنَةِ. Then it will just be as ijazah. At most you can say it is ijazatul muayyana. Ibn Hajar is going to explain now what ijazatul muayyana. So by saying that it has no additional merit, you can understand that it's still going to be valid. So that means if the Shaykh just brought a book and he showed the student the book, and he said that I'm giving you ijazah of what is in this book, and maybe he gives it to the student and the student holds it in his hands for a minute or two, and then he gives it back to the Shaykh, then it will still be a valid method of attaining a narration. The student, if he gets those narrations, he can go and narrate them. فيه إفادة أنها صحيحة بلا مزية. It is a correct method of attaining the narration, although it falls in a lower category. So Mullah al-Qari explains that إلا أنها صحيحة وتجوز للطالب روايته إذا وجد ذلك الأصل. Maybe after some time, after some time, the student managed to get that copy. Or maybe another student who's very close to the Shaykh, he copied from that original copy. So now the student goes to this colleague of his, and he tells him that you managed to copy from the book of our Shaykh, and I'll see which narrations they are. So once وَغَلَبَ عَلَى ذَنِّي سَلَامَتُهُ مِنْ تَغْيِيرٍ, once he is sure that these are the narrations which were in that book, which the Shaykh showed me and told me that he gives me ijazah for, and which I had the opportunity of holding for 30 seconds, then it will be permissible for him to transmit those narrations, but it will not be munawala, it will be on the category of ijazah. So it will be as ijazah to a normal person. Ibn Hajar explains what is ijazah to a normal person, rather instead of a normal person, a specific person. So he explains what is ijazah to a specific person. وَهِيَ يُجِيزُ الشَّيْخ بِرِوَايَةِ كِتَابٍ مُعَيَّنٍ. So the Shaykh is telling a specific person, a specific book that he is giving ijazah for. So أي من التصانيف المشهورة أو بالأحاديث المعروفة المعينة المسطورة. So maybe like for example he says, I give you ijazah of Sahih al-Bukhari, or I give you ijazah of Sunan al-Tirmidhi, or like that. He's stipulating and specifying the book. وَيُؤَيِّنُ لَهُ كَيْفِيَّةَ رِوَايَةِ لَهُ. He's also specifying how he got the narration. kitab. So he's saying that I got this narration because I heard it from my sheikh, or I got this narration because I got ijazah from my sheikh, or I got I read the whole Sahih al-Bukhari to my sheikh. So he's also there's two things which are being stipulated. The one is the book, and the second is the way that the sheikh got the narrations. So the second condition is also a very integral and important and crucial condition. Al-Malakani rahmallah says, ظاهره أنه شرط في صحة الرواية بالإجازة. That from the apparent text you can understand that this here is a condition. It's a shartun for it to be permissible for you to narrate. So you cannot just go and say, I'm giving you ijazah to narrate Sahih al-Bukhari. You have to also stipulate. فلا بد من تعيين أنه يرويه بالقراءة والسماع والإجازة والمناولة ولا بد من كيفية الإجازة أيضا. So the first condition was that there has to be a chance for the student to write, and the second is that the sheikh must be specifically mentioning that he is giving ijazah. If he does not mention that he is giving ijazah, then Ibn Hajar mentions that majority of the scholars regard it as impermissible. وَإِذَا خَلَتِ الْمُنَاوَلَةُ عَنِ الْإِذْنِ. So how does this take place? يُنَاوِلَهُ الْكِتَابِ. He gives him the book and he tells him, هَذَا مِنْ حَدِيثِ. These are my narrations. So he just gives him the book. The student has the book in his hands, and then the sheikh is saying that these are my narrations. He doesn't say irwi anni, or he doesn't say ajastu laka riwayatahu anni. He doesn't mention anything like that. He just gave him the book and told him he's giving information. Then Ibn Hajar is saying, Lam ya'tabir biha inda al-jumhur, that the vast majority of scholars, they do not consider this here. So now it's no more. It's just giving information. He's telling him, like, something interesting. He's just informing him. He's not giving him ijazah. So, Lam ya'tabir biha inda al-jumhur, and this is what many latter-day scholars have also preferred. But saying that it's the view of majority, there is that small group that permits it. And they say it's like the same when a sheikh have to, just say one student is in another place. And in those times, there was no post-it system, there was no emails also. So if a sheikh is sending the narrations to another person, then from all the, maybe in those times, maybe there was 500 million of people living in the world. So a person will argue that from all the 500 million of people, why did the sheikh stipulate only this one very specific individual who's living in that part of the land? And it's very consciously and specifically sent his book to him. So even though he did not verbally say that he's giving him ijazah, this action of his sending this book and giving it to that particular person, that is enough to indicate that there's ijazah. So this is what Ibn Hajar is explaining. He's saying, وَجَنَاحَ مَنْ اعْتَبَرَهَا إِلَىٰ أَنَّ مُنَاوَلَتَهُ إِيَّاهُ تَقُمْ مَقَامَ إِرْسَالِهِ إِلَيْهِ بِالْكِتَابِ مِنْ بَلَدٍ إِلَىٰ بَلَدٍ. That those who say that if the sheikh had to show him, now the sheikh has 500 students. From all 500 students, why did he actually take out his book only when this student came to visit? Why did he not take out when the other 5 students came earlier in that day, or the other 10 students who came later on that day to visit him? Why did he not take out his book and show them his narrations? So just taking out the book and showing it very specifically to this particular student, that is enough to indicate that the sheikh wants to give it, is giving ijazah. So and they're making qiyas on this here, and they're saying that it is just like when he is sending his book to a specific person in another particular place. So here, Alama Qasim Qutl mentions that Ibn Hajar explained that ما كتبه الشيخ وأرسله إلى الطالب, that when the meaning of this here is that the sheikh writes a few narrations and then he sends it to a very particular student. والمراد بالكتاب الشيء المكتوب. So when he said مقام إرساله إليه بالكتاب, he just refers to anything that's written. وهو المعبر عنه بالكتاب. So this is the qiyas which those scholars who permitted it, the qiyas which they make. And then he says that وَقَدْ ذَهَبَ إِلَى صِحَّةِ الرِّوَايَةِ بِالْكِتَابَةِ الْمُجَرَّدَةِ جَمَاعَةٌ مِنَ الْأَئِمَّةِ. Now if the sheikh only wrote his narrations and he did not mention that he's giving ijazah, then there is a group of scholars who said, a group of imams, so very great scholars, who have agreed that it is permissible. Mullah al-Qari rahmallah has said that بل كثير من المتقدمين والمتأخرين, actually a very great group, a large group of scholars, whether from earlier scholars or from latter day scholars. And then he mentions the names of stalwarts like Ayyub al-Sakhtiyani and Mansur and Layth ibn Sa'ad and other experts of this field. That they said that if the Sheikh has to write on a paper his narrations and give it to you, even though he does not mention Ijāzah, even though he does not mention that he's giving you permission, then to you it means that you got permission, because on this basis, that why did he give it to you specifically? Why did he write it for you? Why did he not write it to his other 499 students? وَلَوْ لَمْ يُقَرَنْ ذَلِكَ بِالْإِذْنِ بِالرِّوَايَةِ. So he's saying that if even though the Shaykh does not clearly write that I give you permission to narrate these hadiths from me, the very fact that he wrote down those narrations and gave those narrations to you, in our context is like when a Shaykh has to give you a copy of a kitab for free, then it is as if he has given you ijazah for that entire kitab, according to these scholars. كَأَنَّهُمْ اكْتَفَوْا فِي ذَلِكَ بِالْقَرِينَةِ. He's saying that they suffice on this here as a qarina. And that is why it is also the sunnah of shuyukh, the practice of shuyukh, that they give gifts of the kitabs which the student is going to be giving, or they give their books. This whole chapter of Mukataba and Munawala shows that the Shaykh will then give a book as a kitab. And that is why in Dora, but they only give it at the end of the year. They give you, if you take the first position, then they give you the best prints. But throughout the year, you use the Indian prints, and then at the end of the year, when you because you came out first in the class, they give you the best prints of all the kitabs. And each ustad who taught you that particular kitab, he gives you the best print of the kitab. So, for example, if you're in Darul Mazhabal, then he give you the best print of Sahih al-Bukhari, and then our ustad of Sahih Muslim was Mufti Mutara and Mufti Muhammad Patel rahimahullah, so then they gave us a copy of Sahih Muslim, etc. So he's saying that كَأَنَّهُمْ اِكْتَفَوْا فِي ذَلِكَ بِالْقَرِينَةِ. So they're taking this whole qarina, this whole sign, that this qarina is that why did the Shaykh only stipulate and specify that one student. Now Ibn Hajar is now studied this whole thing, and he's mentioning his opinion on this here. So he's saying that actually they got a point. وَلَمْ يَظْهَرْ لِي فَرْقٌ قَوِيٌّ بَيْنَ مُنَاوَلَةِ الشَّيْخِ من يده للطالب وبين إرساله إليه بالكتاب من موضع إلى آخر إذا خلا كل منهما عن الإذن. He's saying it makes the same whether it's mukataba with no idhn and whether it's munawala with no idhn. So both are exactly the same, and therefore it should be permissible for the student to narrate it. Now, here with regards to wordings that can be used when narrating through munawala, so Allama al-Qani rahmallah said, al-aslu inda al-qawmi wal-jumhur al-man'u min itlaqi haddathana wa akhbarana fihima. That okay, it's permissible for you to narrate if the Shaykh wrote those narrations, or it's permissible for you to narrate, but you cannot use just the words haddathana, or you cannot use the word akhbarana. Why? خوفا من حمله على غير المراد. It's very people will then assume that you heard it, meantime you didn't hear it, you got it through, it was written to you. So Allama Munawi rahmallah mentions words which could be used. He says وحيث صحة الرواية بالمناولة لا تؤدى عند الجمهور إلا بلفظ يشعر بها. That you have to use such words which denote that you got this narrations through munawala, and now you are transmitting it. So you have to say nawalani, or you have to say haddathani, or you have to say haddathani fulanun munawalatan, or you have to say akhbarani fulanun munawalatan. So these are how you have to say. You're qualifying it. You're saying haddathana, or you're saying akhbarana fulanun ijazatan, or fulanun munawalatan, or ijazatan, or munawalatan. Or you can use words which very clearly denote and indicate that these narrations were attained through ijazah. For example, you can say adinali, or you can say atlaqali, or you can say sawwagali, or you can say abahali, or you can say nawalani, etc. Now Ibn Hajar rahmallah explains another case where it is necessary to get permission from the Shaykh. But in explaining these scenarios where it's necessary and crucial to get permission, you're also learning the various methods of attaining a narration. So Ibn Hajar is not saying that this is one method of attaining a narration and this is the condition for that method. This is the second method of attaining a narration. Rather, he's telling you conditions when is essential, when it's necessary to get permission from the Shaykh. And in passing, you are learning also the various ways in attaining a narration, how you can get a narration from your sheikh. So he says, وَقَدَ اشْتَرَطُ الْإِذْنَ فِي الْوِجَادَةِ. Like this here, they have also put stipulated that the sheikh has to give ijazah in narrations which are attained through wijada. Now, with regards to this word ijazah, explaining the linguistics of this word, Allama Munawi rahmallah said, وَهِيَ بِكَسْرِ الْوَاوِ, that you read it as wijada with a kasra on the waw. And then he says, ismun lima akhadha min al-ilm. He's saying that this here, it's the ism of what a person finds. So he just finds غَيْرُ مَسْمُوعٍ, and he did not hear it from the sheikh. So he was walking one day somewhere, he went into one masjid, and on the shelf of the masjid, he pulled out a book, he opened a book, and he found that this is the handwriting of that particular sheikh. So maybe the sheikh, he made mukataba to another student, and maybe that student, he was storing his books in the masjid, and maybe that student passed away. Now that book is still there in the masjid, and the student, this another person comes and he finds that book. So this here is called wijada. He just found the book. So this word, actually, you follow the laws of Arabic, it's not a proper masdar, so it's a made-up masdar. And therefore, Al-Malaqani explained, وَهِيَ مَصْدَرٌ مُوَلَّدٌ قصد به المحدثون بيان معنى هذا النوع من وجوه التحمل. They just made up this word wijada, they made up this masdar because they wanted to explain that this is a method in which the student got the narrations. He just found a book with the handwriting of the sheikh. And why did they not use the general masdar of wajada yajidu? He's saying because حيث رأوا العرب فرقوا بين مصادر وجد على اختلاف معانيه. That the word wajada comes in different meanings, but for every different meaning it comes for, they put a different masdar for it. So for example, they would say wajdan, wajada yajidu wajdan, if you are taking the meaning of istighna. Likewise, they will say wajada yajidu wajdan, if you are taking the meaning of huzn. Right? They will say wajada yajidu wajdan, if you are taking the meaning of asaba. So like that, for every different meaning that the word wajada conveys, there is a different masdar. So therefore, the muhaddithun said that okay, now this here is a completely different meaning. You are meaning that he found a book. So therefore, we make up a masdar for it and we'll call it wijada. Explaining the technical meaning, Allama Munawi rahmallah explained, والوجادة اصطلاحا وجدان شيء من علم أنه بخط راويه أو مصنفه. You find any book and you know for sure that it's written by a particular scholar. So Hafiz ibn Hajar explains the scenario and he says, وهي يجد بخط يعرف كاتبه. Now if you look, Sheikh Nuruddin Itr, he put both rabs on the word يعرف and on the word katib. So he said you can either read it as يعرف كاتبه, then the word katib, because you're reading it in majhul, so the word katib becomes the naib file, or you can read it as يعرف كاتبه. So he's like suggesting that you can read it in any way. However, Sheikh Rahili, in his footnotes, he claims, no, you have to read the word as ma'ruf. You have to read it as ya'rifa. As ya'rifu. You cannot read it as yu'rafu. You have to read it in ma'ruf, and because you're reading it in ma'ruf, then therefore the word katib becomes the maf'ul. So in his footnote, he says, katibahu, hadha huwa as-sawab, kama fi ba'd an-nusakh. He's saying because we are looking in some of the manuscripts. وَلِأَنَّهُ ضُبِطَ فِي الْأَصْلِ كَلِمَةٌ. He's saying that the word يَعْرِفُ, it clearly comes with the word in some of the manuscripts with a fatha on the ya and a kasra on the ra. So therefore he says وَقَدْ جَاءَتْ فِي طَبْعَةِ الدَّكْتُورِ عِطْرِ بِضَمِّ that in the that where Sheikh Nuruddin Itr is suggesting that you can read it as يُعْرَفُ كَاتِبُهُ, he's saying that huwa ghalatun, he's saying that that is incorrect. So a person basically finds a book and he knows who wrote the book. Now this is irrespective of whether the person is his contemporary or not. سواء عاصره أم لم يعاصر. That whether the person is a mu'asir or whether he's not a mu'asir. So you know that so many times you find handwriting letters. Like when you come to Darul Uloom Azadwal, then they have that practice of where whenever any sheikh would come, then he should write a note. So for example, Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda, when he went there, he wrote a note on his impressions and his advice, etc. about the institute. So like, for example, now you go there and you see his handwriting there. and you found it. But meantime, you were probably born even after he passed away. So he says, سواء عاصره أم لم يعاصر. So he finds a book and he knows who the author of this book is. And thereafter, when he's transmitting it, he says, وجدت بخط فلان. So now in this case, Ibn Hajar is saying, ولا يسوغ فيه إطلاق أخبرني. He cannot say أخبرني إلا إذا كان له منه إذن بالرواية عنه. So it's an essential that he must have had Ijāzah. The Sheikh must have said that I give this person. So in that whole case of Munawwala, we said that where the Sheikh will just take the kitab, give it to the student for a few seconds and then take it and put it away. So maybe the Sheikh then also then in this way the Sheikh must have given prior Ijāzah, but the student didn't have access to it, and now finally he finds access to it. وَأَطْلَقَ قَوْمٌ ذَلِكَ فَقُلِّتُ. He's saying that some people, they would just go and say that أخبرنا, meantime they didn't have Ijāzah, and because of doing this they invited unwarranted criticism. People, scholars would then say that they are incorrect. They would then regard it as wrong what they have mentioned. Now it's important to note that when there is no Ijāzah, then many did not consider this as a valid method of attaining a narration. You can't just go and pick up a book and say that, okay, and now when there's no Ijāzah, oh, now I found this book with the handwriting of so and so now I got the Ijāzah. Otherwise, you can think how cool it would be. Did you go, you find manuscripts of the Sahih Sitta, you find the manuscript of Sahih al-Bukhari, then you can say that Haddathana al-Bukhari, because you found the handwriting of Imam Bukhari. So obviously it's absurd. So therefore, there are very few who regarded it as permissible when there is no Ijāzah. Then the reason why they mentioned it is because of the necessity of practicing upon these narrations. That it might not be permissible for you to narrate a hadith which you just found in a particular book, and a particular scholar wrote it, but it will be necessary for you to practice upon it. So obviously, if the person is a mujtahid, then if he finds a hadith of ahkam, but for you, if you're not a muhaddith, maybe you find some fada'il. So then you can practice upon those fada'il, and it will not be regarded as a bid'ah. Maybe say you don't find a hadith for a particular action anywhere else, but you find it in this written notes of a particular scholar, so it's no more going to be a bid'ah. You can now practice upon these narrations. Ibn Hajar rahmallah moves on to the next method of obtaining a hadith. Now we'll just have to go very fast through this here. So he says, وَكَذَا الْوَصِيَّةِ بِالْكِتَابِ is when the sheikh has to make a wasiyah. So maybe at a time when he is passing away, or maybe he's going to be migrating, he's going to be traveling. So he says that this book must be given to so-and-so. So a very particular person he is giving it to. Maybe he's mentioning one book, or maybe he's mentioning all these books of mine. So now again, that whole same concept then applies, that why did the sheikh only stipulate from all his thousands of students? Why did he only choose and stipulate this one student? So maybe they felt that that means that he's giving him Ijāzah. He's not very explicitly mentioning it, but in this implicit way he's giving him Ijāzah. So he said, فَقَدْ قَالَ قَوْمٌ مِّنَ الْأَئِمَّةِ الْمُتَقَدِّمِينَ يَجُوزُ لَهُ أَن يَرْوِيَ تِلْكَ الْأُصُولِ. Now he got Ijāzah by the sheikh saying that this book must be given to him, because the sheikh specifically mentioned, it will be considered as he got riwayah. Now although Ibn Hajar rahmallah mentions قَوْمٌ مِّنَ الْأَئِمَّةِ, there are hardly even 3-4 scholars that you are going to be able to find. For example, Muhammad ibn Sirin, but at the end also it's proven that Muhammad ibn Sirin also made a tawaqquf on it. So ala anna ibn Sirin al-qail bil-jawaz tawaqqafa fi ba'd. So very hardly scholars when there's no Ijāzah. Wa ba'dhalika al-jumhur illa in kana lahu min Ijāzah. Yes, if there is Ijāzah, then it's a different story. Then obviously the person can narrate, and now he got access to those narrations, so you can rest assured. Another case where it is necessary to have permission from the sheikh, and this then becomes another way that scholars felt that a person could get narrations, is through i'lam. وَكَذَا اشْتَرَطُ الْإِذْنَ بِالرِّوَايَةِ فِي الْإِعْلَامِ. Now what's i'lam all about? So Ibn Hajar rahmallah explains, وَهُوَ أَن يُعْلِمَ الشَّيْخُ أَحَدَ الطَّلَبَةِ. The sheikh has to inform one of them, the students, بِأَنِّي أَرْوِي الْكِتَابَ الْفُلَانِ عَنْ فُلَانِ. So the student, maybe when they go visit him one day, and in passing, in talking, the sheikh told him that, this particular book, I narrated from so and so. So أَرْوِي الْكِتَابَ الْفُلَانِ عَنْ فُلَانِ, or هَذَا الْكِتَابِ. So maybe he can either be referring to the kitab. I narrated Sahih al-Bukhari from Sheikh Yunus, for example, Sheikh Yunus Jampuri. Or you can maybe point to the kitab and you can say, Hadha al-kitab. So again, yeah, the Sheikh, the student now can't just go out and say, because the Sheikh informed me, so therefore it means that now I can also narrate it. But in kana law minu ijazah i'tubira. Yes, the Sheikh will have to very clearly say that I also give you ijazah, that I got ijazah of Sahih al-Bukhari from so and so, and I'm giving you ijazah. وإلا فلا عبرة بذلك. If it does not clearly mention this, then there is no ibra in it. كالإجازة العامة في المجاز له لا في المجاز به. So now you get ijazat al-amma. Ijazat al-amma is basically where the person has to say that I give ijazah to everybody in this particular time. So you can see here such a broad ijazah. So Ibn Hajar rahmallah explains what ijazat al-amma. كي يقول أجزت لجميع المسلمين أو لمن أدرك حياتي. Everyone who's alive now. أو لأهل الإقليم الفلاني. All the people of South Africa. All the people of a particular town. I give them all ijazah. So he's saying that, okay, here in I'lam, it is closer to being valid because it's the more inhisar you have, the more you're confining and restricting it, the more possibility and the more chance that we can accept it. And when saying that it is Ijazatul Amma, then it's so broad that, you know, the population of South Africa, say 60 million people, or maybe take the Muslim population, 1 million people or 2 million people, depending on who you consider as Muslims and who you don't consider as Muslims. So it will be so many people. But if you're just telling those that particular student, then it's very confined. Inshallah, we'll do the next 2 lessons on Thursday and then the final 2 lessons on Saturday, and then we'll complete the kitab inshallah on Saturday. So until then, jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.